welcome! So this is part 2 of drawing a pine warbler. As people are kind of trickling in, I'm just going to talk a little bit about what kinds of pencils I'll be using today. So just a quick review, the only supplies really that you need are a piece of paper, like at minimum a piece of paper and number 2 pencil like this. Just saying that in case you don't have colored pencils. But if you do have colored pencils, any kind will do. Some of my favorite kinds of brands are Faber-Castell Polychromos, Derwent, Prismacolor, and Caran d'Ache Luminance are really good too. I will mostly be using the Polychromos today. So when I refer to colors, I'll be referring to those ones, but you know, equivalents of those colors can be found in a lot of other brands as well. So today we're going to be working on the back of the bird. So mostly, you know, like this area and then on to here. And we might a little bit get into this group of feathers, the median coverts here. So the main colors that we're going to need are, you know, any kinds of yellows that you have are definitely good to take out. The base layer that I'm going to use is going to be, you know, like a pretty light yellow. This is called light chrome yellow. It's upside down. Light chrome yellow. And then, you know, I have some darker yellows too. So yellows that are kind of brownish, like ochre yellows. Naples ochre is one of them. Another color that's really useful for this pine warbler is the green gold. So that's kind of like a brownish goldish color. So if you have Polychromos, it's this one here. You may notice that this picture is not the same as the one that I drew last week. I'm still admittedly getting used to the whole process of doing these classes online, so it's honestly pretty tricky to draw an outline while there's, you know, my phone on a tripod and like other stuff around. So I just kind of wanted to make some changes to the proportions, so I ended up redoing my pine warbler. So yeah, I have the outline and the head completely pretty much done. I know last time we only did kind of part of the head, but I continued on with the rest of the cheek. So for the cheek, and also on into the back, there are some other colors we'll want as well. So if you do have like a greenish yellowish color, that's also a great one to have. I'm going to be using a lot of this olive green yellowish. But if you don't have that, like for example in the Prismacolor range, there's not really a color that's that equivalent. What you can do instead is take like a grass green color and mix that with kind of a raw umber, like brown color. So combinations that kind of look like this. You can mix those together and use really light pressure with your green and then go over the top of it with this light brown. Hopefully you can see that. And then other colors that you'll want, it's always nice to have, if you have Polychromos, it's nice to have the dark sepia. That's one of my favorite pencils. As you can see, it's getting kind of worn down. It's like a neutral color. It's sort of dark brown, but it's almost grayish brown. And then I always like to have all the different kinds of gray that I have. So warm gray and cold gray. In the Polychromos range, it's going to be numbered 1 through 6, from lightest to darkest gray. I'll probably be using more warm grays on this bird. So if you are able to have the reference photo pulled up on a printout or like on another device, you'll notice that the grays on the back are like a pretty warm tone. They're like a yellowy tone. So I'll mostly be using warm grays today. All right. Those are the main colors that we'll need. It may be helpful too if we get to the wings to have like a really light blue. We might be adding a little bit of something like sky blue. We'll see how it goes today. Alright, those are the main colors. Also browns. You know, when I'm working on birds that have any kind of brown in them, I have a whole bunch of different browns pulled out just in case I need them. So, in the polychromos, that's going to be things like, I think we're probably going to use this one that's called Bistro. And then Raw Umber. Probably be using that as well. Other supplies, I always like to have my pencil sharpener. I like my pencils to be super sharp. Not everybody does that. It's kind of like personal preference, but I sharpen them a lot. And then, you know, it's great to have an eraser. I'm just using the one that's on the end of my pencil. I also love my electric eraser, so I'll use that a little bit. Another equivalent to that is something called a Tombow eraser, which is pretty similar. You can actually get better control with it, kind of than the electric eraser. It's something I've been meaning to try. And then I also have like a little soft brush that I use for brushing eraser crumbs off. That's because the eraser crumbs are kind of annoying, and I tend to do a fair bit of erasing. And that way you don't smudge with your hand or get like the oils from your hand on your picture. Alright, so the first thing we're going to do, and by the way, if you only have your outline drawn, you don't have quite this much done on the head, that's totally fine. A lot of these concepts are going to apply also to the head, so we're going to work on the back. I'll do a little bit under here too, because we didn't really get to the throat last time. So we'll talk about that, because this area is very similar to here on the throat. Any questions? All right. So we're going to erase the back line here until you can barely see it. You still want to be able to see it. I'll just go kind of partway down like this, but just barely. That way when you come in with your colored pencil, you're not going to have that like graphite left behind, because you don't want to be able to see that. And then I'm going to take my light chrome yellow. Any light yellow that you may have will do. And I'm just going to do a layer of that on the back. And when you are doing this, it's very important that you go in the direction of the feathers. As you can see, I'm doing that just kind of back and forth. And, you know, fill in as well as you possibly can. So you don't want white spots left behind. And you want to go light to dark. At least if you're working on white paper like I am, which most of you probably are. You're going to do light to dark. If you are working on a surface called pastel matte, you can actually go over dark with light, which is pretty neat, but you can't really do that on paper. So we're not putting in any details, we're basically just coloring for now, and I'm just going to do that sort of triangle area there. And now we're going to go over the top of that. Let's take a look at my photo with a slightly darker yellow. So I'm actually going to use, let's see, Naples yellow. And you know what, actually, it's my mind. Dark Naples ochre, which is kind of like a brownie yellow. And we're going to start at this line here. because it's a little bit darker there. And put a layer over there. And now make it a little bit more textury instead of just, you know, coloring back and forth. So if you have your photo handy, just keep looking at your reference photo and notice that there's this darker area near the line of the back here. And we are going to go over this with the olive greenish yellow as well in just a moment, but this is my second layer. Colored pencil is about layering. The other thing you can do, you know, if you have white spots in your paper showing through, is if you go over the top of it with something like cream and just kind of blend the darker color with the lighter color, you can go over the whole thing with that actually, and use a little bit more pressure. Basically, it's kind of like you're blending it together and making sure you don't have like the tooth of the paper showing through. So feathers, you know, on the back of a bird are going to be really similar to fur. They're really, the texture anyway, looks similar at first glance to fur. Because these are contour feathers. But you'll notice too that they are kind of in layers. So on the photo, you'll see that there's kind of two darker areas where the feathers are overlapping. I'll sketch those in just so you can see what I mean. So I'm going to take my dark sepia and sort of sketch in where those are. Oh, actually, my bad. I have to go down a little farther first. So first one is where that pencil line was. So you can lightly, it's always good to start light, because if you start to sort of make a mistake, then you can erase. Because of course with colored pencil, you cannot erase it nearly as easily as regular pencil. Especially the darker colors like my dark sepia here. And I'm just doing this texture that's really like a fur-like motion here. And it can be helpful to go, you know, from the bottom to top, since this is a shadow between layers of feathers here. And it's kind of darkest in, if you have your reference photo, you'll see that there's sort of a triangle of darkness here. And then there's another area right here that's kind of dark. So it helps me when I'm doing these dark areas to think about, like, just try and think about, you know, it's 3D. So this is a shadow, and over the top of it is another layer of feathers. So just have that in your mind, like, you want it to look as 3D as possible. It just helps me to keep thinking about that. So imagine even like the end of your pencil is almost going under these other feathers while you're drawing. Obviously it's not actually doing that, but at least the way my brain works, it helps if I think that way as I'm drawing it. Hopefully it might help you too. And you know, these lines, so I should also show you, let me grab another piece of paper. Sorry, this just came to mind, so it is going to be on a sticky note. But a feather, a contour feather, is going to have this central, this is way zoomed in, by the way, as far as like the size that these would be. It's going to have the central shaft here, and then barbs that come off the sides like this. So when I say it's like fur, the barbs are what look like fur, basically. And then, you know, on this bird, it's going to be facing kind of like that. So that's like a zoom in. That's basically like, you know, zoom in of what one feather is going to look like. But there's tons of feathers there, and they're a lot smaller than what I drew. Not a very good picture, but you get the idea. So they, you know, the end of the feather is going to be facing this way, and it's coming down like that. But you can't really see all that because all these feathers are overlapping each other like this. Like, say this is another one here, and that's overlapping. So they're all going to be overlapping each other, but they're also in rows. So it's like feather here, feather here, and then above that you have another row. And they're all in like this, it's almost like a lattice work thing here, but it's actually pretty organized. But you know, they're very fluffy. The body feathers are. So basically you've just got all this fluff. Once we get to the wing, it's going to get way more organized than that, but so just basically a thing to keep in mind. These are the contour feathers that are going to keep the bird warm, insulate the bird. So then I have that one layer here that's kind of darker, and you know, these barbs are not going to be, like I showed you, they're not going to be in straight lines, like straight on a diagonal like that. They're going to be kind of fluffy, like kind of coming out in different, little bit of a curvature in different directions. So you see what I'm saying, like some are here, some are coming out there. So then above this layer, we have another layer that has a shadow. And start to sketch that in. So it's helpful to me to just have those outlines of the shadows in, so that then when we come in with some of our next layers, you know, the greenish olive yellow, we know where those layers are. And the other thing I noticed, and I kind of noticed it too, you know, on the head of this bird, is that there is some gray along the very top of the back, like right here. So we can block that in. I'm going to use, let's see, a warm gray 3. If you're using Prismacolor pencils, a pretty common brand, I think the equivalent of that actually would be like the 30% warm gray. So basically, if I say 3, the equivalent is like 30%. If I say, I don't think it comes in tens. If I say, oh wait, that's not right. If I say 4, that's more like 50%, I think. Basically, when I show you the pencil, if you're using Prismacolor, just kind of look at that color and pull out your equivalent. So I'm going to just put a line of gray, and I did that along the top of the head too. This is, again, warm gray. You want to be careful using cold gray with yellows, because if you do, you may get like a muddy color. Sometimes that might be what you're going for, but if it's not, you want to be careful with that. So now, let's see. I think I'm going to take my green gold now. If you don't have green gold, like a raw umber color, basically a brownish goldish color is what you're going to want now. So I'm going to go kind of to the bottom of the layer here and just work up, but not all the way to the top of that layer, just like this. Along the bottom edge. So this is kind of like the second darkest area. And I'm using pretty strong pressure, but not like super strong pressure. Enough that it shows up fairly well. Add in a little more dark sepia here. So I'm looking at my reference photo as I go. If you're not able to do that, because you don't have a printer or like a second device, that's totally fine. You can just watch me. And now I'm gonna use, let's see. I'm gonna take out my, where'd it go? Sorry, just a second. I have a lot of pencils out here. Olive green yellowish. And if you don't have that, you can just mix like a light green and a brown, like I said. In which case I would start with the light green and go over the top of it with brown, using fairly light pressure. And again, I do like to keep my pencils pretty sharp, especially when you're doing textured areas like this. There's a spot here that's good for light yellow ochre too. And I'm going to do a little bit of shadow with raw umber here. The raw umber is nice for the bottom of the shadow, which is going to transition into the next feather layer too. So when you get more towards this area of the back, the feathers are going to be a little bit, they have longer barbs, they're a little bit looser. And then I'm going to sort of blend those together with another one of my darker yellows, a Naples yellow. So I'm blocking that in at the top of each layer here. Sort of like a mustardy sort of yellow. And if you have your reference photo, you'll notice there's a pretty bright spot here. I'm using cadmium yellow for that. So when you have bright spots like that, you want to make sure that you maintain contrast. So you can take something darker like the light yellow ochre and put that in here again. So you have contrast around it, so like that the bright spot that's right here is going to stand out more. And one thing to get used to with colored pencils is trying to not be afraid to go too dark. And that's something that I sometimes have trouble with. But it's really important to get that contrast because that's what will make it look more three-dimensional and alive and real. And you know, you can do it gradually if you're nervous about it too, because I know it is tricky. They're hard to erase. See, like these layers here, I do need to make those a little bit darker with my dark sepia. Use a bit more pressure. And you want your pencil really sharp for stuff like this because you want these lines in between the barbs, kind of. Just like that. And then a little more raw umber here. I hope it's not confusing how many colors I'm using. But basically, I'm trying to show, you know, what I do when I'm typically doing a colored pencil drawing. But you don't have to use quite this many colors, especially, I mean, if you're first starting out, it's totally fine to just use 3 or 4 colors for this area. Like a couple of yellows, an olive color, and a brown. Alright, so underneath of this shadow, we have a little bit more feathers here. I'm going to start working on those. I'm just going to do part of it though, because really it's basically the same deal as what I just talked about. And then we'll move on to this belly area a little bit. But I do want to show, because there's sort of more definition between the barbs. If you're looking at the photo, you can see that. I do want to show how I would represent that in the drawing. So again, I'm erasing any graphite lines that might interfere. And I'm going to take my cadmium yellow lemon. And just start doing a base layer. Oh, actually, yeah. Sorry, I'm going to use light cadmium yellow, actually. Pretty similar. Again, when I go back and forth, I'm going in the direction, basically, that the feather barbs are in. I wouldn't go like this, because that would mess things up. Even in the base layer, it would make things look weird in the end. So then to show the definition, there's a couple of feathers in particular I see that have like really well-defined barbs there. You would take something like a dark sepia or maybe a dark warm gray if you don't have the dark sepia. And let's say I have a feather right here. I'm going to kind of outline where that feather is, and then I have another one here that's kind of overlapping. And between the barbs here, there are little, very thin shadows. Okay, and then I have this shadow that we already started. And then I'm going to take a darker color. These feathers are pretty dark, so I'm going to use first a light yellow ochre, which is, even though the title of the color is light, it is a fairly dark color. Go in the direction of those barbs, so same direction as your dark sepia, because it's like an extension of these. You know, these are the light areas in between those dark. And then you can take something like a raw umber and sort of pull the shadow down. Another thing we can do is a little bit of blending. A pencil that's really good for blending is Warm Gray 2, if you have it. And if you're blending, you're going to do more, like use a little bit more pressure. It's like you're blending the shadow into the light area. And then, you know, when you do that, you'll kind of lose some contrast, and you can bring colors in if you want to add the contrast back in a bit. And then again, I'm going to take the olive green yellowish and add a little bit of that. And then, you know, if you were continuing on, you have pretty similar stuff going on. There's actually a little hint of burnt sienna in there too. There's my burnt sienna. Burnt sienna. So like in places you can use this to add a little brightness. And then mix that together with like your raw umber. Yeah, so if you have the gist of, you know, the idea how to sketch in those back feathers, that is something that you can work on your own. Because, you know, if I did a tutorial of this entire thing, it would probably take many hours, so. But I will see, does anybody have any questions? Oh, hi, John! Good to see you! Yeah, I hope everyone's enjoying this. I'm going to move on now to some of the breast feathers. So you'll notice that there's a few streaks in that area, but we're going to start, of course, with a light yellow base layer. And again, I'm going to erase this line, basically to the end of where the fluffy part is, the really fluffy part on his chest. You still want to be able to see it, but just barely. And then, again, I'm going to use, let's see, light cadmium yellow and put in a base layer. You want to be careful here when you get to this fluffy area. You don't want to do, too hard pressure in the area that's fluffy, because you want to make sure that you're able to maintain that texture. So when you get towards the edge, kind of back off with your base layer a little bit before you get right to the edge. And again, think about the direction of the feathers. So they're not going to go, straight like this. They kind of curve around like that. So try to reflect that as you put down the base layer. And just in case, you haven't worked on this throat area at all, I know that's sort of something I jumped ahead with. It's a really similar concept there, but again, like we talked about with this face area, this is called the lores. It's similar to that in that the feathers are really, really tiny. So I marked in these rows of feathers. You can see the shadows on them, and the feathers are really small. Let me zoom in a little so you can see. Yeah, so these are very small feathers in here. You have this dark area, the shadow, and then the light area is the next feather layer. Okay, make sure that's fairly focused. So yeah, basically you do the same base layer in here, but when you go in and mark the next layers, you would make shorter strokes with your pencil because the feathers are smaller. And you'll notice too, the feather direction changes when you get to this area. It's pretty slanted. So the barbs are going to be more on a slant. I'll do a little bit more erasing. Just like that. Okay, so we'll go about down to there for now. And then when you do get to the edge here, that's going to be different. I'm going to sharpen my pencil some more to make sure that I really get that texture in. And then mark in this sort of fluffy edge. Oh, I'm so glad, Colleen. Hi. And you do have the skill. It just takes practice. I tell everybody, anyone can draw. Just have to put in the practice. I know that can be hard when there's so many other things going on, though, in your life. It can be hard to find time to practice. So you'll notice if you're looking at the picture, there's kind of like 3 blobs at the edge. So there's like this bunch of feathers here, then it kind of poofs out again down here. And hopefully you can see this, because I know I'm using a really light color. This is where it's important to really get rid of that graphite because we're using such a light color. You don't want that to show through in your picture. And if you don't erase it all the way, unfortunately, once you put pencil over it, it can be hard to get rid of. Alright, now I'm going to use, let's see, Naples yellow. So sort of like that mustardy yellow, like a darker yellow. And I'm going to move to this area and start blocking that in and using sort of more textury pencil strokes. And I'll also use this brush to brush away, like, you know, the pencil lead that's coming off, because that can be annoying. If you're using Prismacolors, that happens a lot. You'll get all these little specks of it. You really want to avoid brushing your hand over it too much, because that can really smudge things, especially when you want to get a textury effect. So again, think about direction of the barbs, kind of like that in this area. And it's overlapping, you know, these back and side feathers, so I am going to talk about that and how we can bring some shadows in and show that overlapping that's going on. Now we can use, I'm going to take the green gold. Where did it go? Oh, here it is. Sorry about that. And I'm going to use that in this darker area. And these are really fluffy feathers here. The belly feathers are some of the fluffier contour feathers. Now, let's see. Got some raw umber. I'm going to use pretty light pressure with this. I'm sort of blending a little bit here with my green gold. And then I'm going to go over the top of this with dark sepia, but I'm going to sharpen it really, really well. And I'm going to use pretty light pressure because we don't have the kind of shadows that we've got going on here. These are very subtle. And when I say shadows, I mean these really thin lines in between the barbs. So we're going to sort of show this overlap area now. You want your pencil extra, extra sharp. And again, think about, you know, these are feathers going over the top of these ones. So if you need to make some adjustments to this layer too to kind of make it blend a little more, you can. And then as you get up here, you know, some of the barb directions sort of change because it's fluffy. There we go. So again, with this part, you kind of have to be brave about putting in the dark areas there. And if you do make a mistake, this is where it's really nice to have something like an electric eraser or a Tombow eraser. And you can bring that in and erase an area. The only thing about that is, of course, once you erase a spot here, you're going to have like this spot that's erased. So it will take a little patience to blend, to bring your pencils back in and then blend the area to the surroundings. Which is why it's always good to remember what colors you're using. Because if you forget what you're using over here and then you erase a spot here, then it's like, oh, it's going to be harder to make it blend back in. So I'm trying to soften this line here so it just overlaps nicely. And another thing, I know I mentioned this last time, but someone like me who sharpens their pencils a lot, this is a very handy tool to have. It's a pencil extender. So like this is my black pencil here, which I use a lot. So once you get to a pencil that's like this long, obviously that's really hard to hold. So you can stick it in here and then you have a nice long pencil again. So then you can use it until it's basically gone. And develop a nice collection of tiny little pencils. Alright, so now I'm going to use a little bit of warm gray, like one of my darker warm grays. Let me see. I'm going to use warm gray 5, which is almost the darkest one. Use a little bit of that over the top of shadowy areas here. And you'll notice that the shadow area kind of ends where the streaks end. We're going to do the streaks last, of course. When you have markings over the top of yellow, you know, like sort of light streaks, you always want to do that part last. It's kind of like the final detail. And then, you know, for this floof on the edge here, I'm going to bring in one slightly darker yellow pencil and put another layer on there. So I'm going to use, I do want it to stay looking very bright though, because it's a nice bright yellow. I'm going to use cadmium yellow. So this is, you know, it's pretty yellow. It's not really like a browny yellow. It's pretty much just yellow. And you can kind of blend, you know, by blending, I mean use a little more pressure and shorter strokes like that. Blend the shadow into the edge here. A good pencil to use for blending is anything that says like glaze on it. So this is light yellow glaze. This one is also excellent for blending, but it will get rid of your contrast. It's the luminance white. So usually when you use that for blending, you have to go back over the top of it with some more color. I wouldn't really use it with yellow. It's better with things like gray. Okay. Take my, let's see, light chrome and bring a little bit more of that to the edge here. And now I'm going to work on the streaks. So I have this pulled up on my computer. Don't really want to move the phone because I don't want to mess up our position. But if you have like a photo program, or even if you have a preview function on your computer, it's really nice to use the magnifier tool, which will give you like a nice round like magnifier that will help you to really zoom in and see the colors really well on those streaks. So that's what I'm doing right now, and I'm noticing we have kind of a mixture of browns and dark grays. And on the outer streaks, you know, there's sort of like 3 streaks. We even have a little bit of black in there. So I'm going to start again with the lightest thing. So I'm going to use a warm gray. Let's see, a warm gray 5. But I'm only going to use fairly light pressure with it. And I'm going to start with this innermost streak, which is the longer one here. Again, trying to maintain that same nice direction of the barbs as you're going. And then the next streak has a similar sort of tonal value as the base part here. So I'm going to bring that in too. If you want to be really exact, you can also measure the length of the streaks, but so I am going to do, but you don't really have to do that. This next one is a little bit shorter. And finally, we have this little one that's almost more like a spot. The 2 other little teeny tiny spots. Actually, it's like 3 or 4 little spots under here. And obviously every bird's going to be a little bit different, but pine warblers, typically like this one is showing, they just have a few light streaks along the edges of the breast and the adult males. So next I'm going to bring in some brown. I think we'll use some raw umber here. Kind of mixing that in with the gray. And think again too about getting a slight tiny bit of curvature to these streaks. So as the feathers come around like this, you've got a little curve going on here. And then add in a little more shadows with my gray, showing a little bit of the layering going on here. Now finally, I'll use a little bit of dark sepia. It's really an interesting color because it's like, it's not quite brown, not quite gray. It's like this very neutral color. I really like it. It's nice for bringing in some of the final details. And then I'm also going to use the black, and I'm going to sharpen it really well. Looks like it's already pretty sharp. And we're going to use that in this area here. If you see your photo, there's this really dark spot right here. And always, if you're bringing in black really dark like this, make sure you know where you want it to be, because you're not really going to be able to erase it once you use it, even with an electric eraser. And there's a hint of it down here too. I kind of blend these together with a little of olive green. See, sometimes I'll blend like this and then I'll say, well, I want to go back over it to up the contrast again, so add a little more black. All right. Adding a little more brown to the back feathers too. So just to give you an idea too of how the feathers get longer when you get over this way. Gonna be these nice long streaks. And I'm using my raw umber pencil. And again, he's got this warm gray on here, so I'll put that in. Mix it with a little bit more yellow. Yeah, so you'll notice those streaks are longer than some of the ones that are more like in here. So it's helpful to get a really good sense of things like this on a bird. If you're able to either see a specimen up close, like in a museum or in a museum collections, or if you have a pet bird or know someone who has a pet bird. Probably the closest thing to this guy would be something like a canary more so than a parrot. But, you know, just studying any kind of birds up close. Of course, if there's anyone here who bans birds or is a vet or anything like that, then you may get to work hands-on with these animals and really be able to study birds nice and up close. So that's really going to help with your drawing. So drawing is so much about observation, you know, like the more you observe an animal and get to know that animal, the better your ability to draw it, you know. Like, for example, if I do a pet portrait of an animal that I've known for years versus an animal that I haven't known for very long, you can really get, like, the personality of that animal in your drawing a lot better if you know them, of course. And just their whole posture and coloration and everything like that. So observation is just such a huge part of it, you know, because, like, if you improve your observation skills, the drawing skills will go along and come along with that. So instead of thinking like, oh my gosh, I want to be this amazing artist or something, instead think about slowing down and really paying attention to things. That will really help you. All right. Well, we made a fair bit of progress there. Adding a few more lines. I always like doing this fluffy overlapping part. It's a lot of fun. And like here, you know, I'm drawing a feather. It sort of goes in different directions, almost like rays. See that? Like these ones are going that way, and then they come down like this. So even also, you know, if you find a feather on the ground, you can study that. Like if you see a downy feather. And that'll help with your feather drawing. All right. Well, I think that's probably a good point to pause. Does anyone have questions? It's been really nice to have everybody watching today. Next week I'm planning on doing another session at the same time, 8 p.m. Eastern time. So in the next session, we'll start working on the wings. That's a really fun part. So we'll be going like into this area, some of the covert feathers. And basically what I'll plan on doing is, you know, doing a few feathers in each section here. And I won't finish all of them in that feather group. I'll just do a few. So then you can get a sense of what it looks like. And then on your own, you can fill in the rest of the feathers. And then later we'll work on the tail and more of the belly and the legs. All right. Thank you so much for tuning in. And feel free to send me pictures of your drawings. I would really love to see them. You can message them to me or email them to me if you have my email. Thank you so much. Have a good evening.